Do you have fully vacant units on your property that you have mothballed until next semester? If you do, I bet you've thought to yourself, we should list those on Airbnb for game day weekends or for parents visiting their kids. Maybe you're in a college town like Austin or Raleigh or Tallahassee, and your city has large festivals and not enough hotel rooms. You know you could lease those units on a nightly or a weekly basis. Providing short-term rentals on platforms like Airbnb can provide a great source of ancillary income. But it takes it takes a lot of organization. There's the additional setup of providing linens and coffee makers and all the little things that a short-term tenant will expect. Then there's the regulatory and tax issues that could require additional work. More importantly, there's the time and labor to market on all the multiple platforms, handle the reservations and cancellations, the cleaning, and then there's the bookkeeping. All of this turns into a big distraction from the main job at hand, which is operating and leasing your property. That's where Vector Travel comes in. These guys know the short-term rental industry and they know how to relieve all of those burdens from the property manager. And best of all, they've become experts in how to do that with student properties. They understand the complexity of mixing travelers with college students. They know it so well, they can quickly identify if a student property is not going to be a good fit for their program. So if you have vacant units, reach out to Vector Travel and have them do a free, no obligation assessment to determine if enrolling your vacant units in their program will be beneficial. Go to vectorstays.com/SHI. Fill out a quick form to receive more information. You will also get the first month's service fee waived by going to that specific landing page. Again, that's vectorstays.com/SHI. Welcome to the Student Housing Insight Podcast, where we put you in touch with the people who bring student housing to life. I'm your host, Wesley Dees. And joining me today is the great and wonderful Greta Dare.
I'm never going to get tired of that, ever. I love it.
I want to make sure my co-hosts know how special they are.
Aww.
No, you're great. In fact, I got some compliments in the past week or two. You're like, yeah, Greta's great. You got to have her on there more often.
Oh, guys.
Felt like that was their way of saying, you really suck at this, Wes.
Nobody's saying that. Oh my God.
Oh man. So yeah, can you believe this has been this summer, it'll be 5 years that we've been doing this?
No, I thought about that one day and I was like, because I was telling somebody about it and I'm like, holy shenanigans.
Yeah.
That's definitely what I was just thinking in my head. Holy shenanigans. I was like, this has been going on for frickin' ever. Also definitely said frickin'. And I was like, this is insane.
Yeah, no. And our numbers are good. They continue to grow. And, this was just something that I did to kind of help my consulting business. And it's turned into its own thing. So thanks so much to you guys for the support. If you want more information on what we're doing, always check us out at studenthousinginsight.com. Also, if you're in the industry and you missed one of the last podcasts, make sure that you also go to your app store on your mobile device and download the SHI Connect app, it launched April 1st. We've kind of just done a soft launch of it and intend to get everybody on it going into this summer because I think it's a fabulous tool that we'll get more into on how we're using it, but we've got some great contributors on there that are posting some very insightful posts about what they're going through kind of in their day-to-day as student housing professionals. So, and we're all there just to help each other. So make sure that you go and download that. All right. So this is our next installment of our profiles series that I've been doing this year, where we're talking to folks who have been very influential in the student housing industry throughout their career. And if you haven't listened to some of the other ones, the first one he did was Julie Bonin, the COO with Asset Living. which was just fantastic. In February, we did one with Miles Orth, who's the COO at Campus Apartments. And then last month in March, we did Brandon Smith, who hasn't been in the industry as long as Miles and Julie, but he's the VP of Operations, Senior VP of Operations, I believe it is, at Tailwind Group, which is they broke into the top 25 this year and doing some really awesome things from a growth perspective and from a management perspective. So yeah, go back and listen to those. But for this one, we've got a real industry veteran. He says he's retired from student housing, but I don't know how true that really is. He will also be the recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award at Interface this year. And that is Mike Mouron with the Capstone companies. It was originally Capstone Development Corp. If you've been in this industry a decent amount of time, you've probably heard the Capstone name. There's Capstone on Campus Management. There's Capstone Development Partners. There's Capstone Real Estate Investments. There's Capstone Collegiate Communities, which is now just Capstone Communities. And all of those came from the original Capstone Development Corp that Mike started. And I can't wait for everybody to listen to this because Greta, did you know Mike before you actually listened to this?
Yeah, you were sitting there, you were building up that, and I was sitting there and I was like, and if you're anything like me, it's really, really okay to openly admit that you may not. And I'm sorry, Mike. It's really okay to admit that you didn't actually know who Mike was. And I hated thinking that. And I'm so sorry. It was, obviously we're going to be at Interface next week. This is probably going to be released after that. But going into it, I saw, I knew that he was receiving the Lifetime Achievement Award. So the very first thing that I did was, look him up and find out who he was and find out everything I could, because I was like, how do I not know who this person is? This is so odd to me, especially when you're like, if you've been in this industry for any amount of time. I'm like, sir, I have, first off. I didn't know. And that made me feel ridiculous because that hasn't happened before, And
that's one reason I wanted to do this series, because
which I love.
I think there's a history there that, I'm kind of the bridge of, like, I came into this industry in the late 90s. And Greta, you could put your mic on mute so you don't have to laugh out loud this time because we were speaking earlier and Greta realized, I think, how old I am. The fact that I got started in this industry in the late 90s. And so there's been in the 1990s. And it's in a lot of ways, I kind of see myself as the bridge between some of the original, call them godfathers of student housing and, the folks that are on the ground today. And, there's a portion of that has been told to me during my career that I feel like everybody can actually get a lot of benefit out of, to understand how P3 projects and student housing came about, which is something that we're going to get into because Capstone was, in a lot of ways, kind of created the vehicle for the P3 projects that you see so many developers doing with universities now. So I kind of give him a lot of credit for that, and he'll get into the details on that. But yeah, that's who we're segmenting today, and I'll just tell you, make sure you've got time to listen to this. Mike shares about an hour, 10 minutes with us. And, it's a long podcast. I get it. And I think a lot of people may say that's too long for me to listen to, Wes. Hey, I could have broke this out into, 3 or 4 podcasts, but if you really want to understand kind of, especially the second half of this, because he kind of spends the first half talking about how he got into student housing. And then the second half of it is really what he's done in student housing. I think that's the most important part, not just what he's done for student housing, but also kind of the legacy he's left behind. So yeah, I think that's that's
I'm really glad that you said that, because I think that, obviously all jokes about the late 90s aside, but see, now that the laugh's coming back, but no, I think that that's the thing about any industry. And I loved finding out that the whole P3 concept kind of originated with this, because any industry, if it's the music industry, if it's the marketing, whatever industry it is, and this is our industry, right? Understanding the key players and the history of where we all came from and how we got to this point is crucial for all of us to know and understand. And hearing the actual voices, having this opportunity to hear the story from the voices directly from the mouths of the people who are there for it, it's incredible, and it's exciting, and it is really, really great. And I'm grateful to be able to do it and to understand it. And so, thanks for that, honestly.
Yeah. Well, we'll get we'll play the interview here in a second, but just because we've got a couple things that we just want to make sure everybody is aware of announcement wise. But again, I think this is kind of a perfect, that opening of welcome to Student Housing Insight, where we're putting you in touch with the people who bring student housing to life. This is definitely one of those guys that I wouldn't say he breathed life into student housing, but he certainly evolved student housing, and it's an important voice to listen to and kind of understand the history. So yeah, we'll get into that here in just a second. But I wanted to follow up with everybody, and because I think this is probably the first episode after we've had our first shop talk.
That's right.
So for those that haven't been following, the little bit of background on Shop Talk, one, it stands for Student Housing Operations. That's what SHOP stands for. But there was a Zoom call that was basically started at the onset of the pandemic in March of 2020, where industry leaders like Chris Richards and Miles Worth, Jen Cassidy, Dan Aldersdorf came together and said, look, we got to talk about some of this stuff that's going on that we're challenged with right now. What are we doing for our employees? What are we doing for, residents that, are being told to go home by their university? And those Zoom calls, those Zoom meetings were very instrumental, and they happen kind of once a week, sometimes twice a week through the first few months of the pandemic, and then ultimately became something that we did on a monthly basis. And it was really just I would say C-suite and executives within the industry, as well as some service providers that were asked to come in, and because there were folks like Leap that I'll throw a shout out to, that were really instrumental in helping us kind of curve some issues that could have come up with international students. And so
love you, Leap.
and if you don't know who Leap is, go search Michael Davies on LinkedIn. He's a great guy, and he'll be at Interface. I'm sure he'll be glad to meet up with you. But anyway, that kept evolving, and we saw a real need for it to make sure we're all on the same page with what's going on with pre-leasing and how we're tracking that, because that was going to be very important for investors and lenders, as well as collections. And so there's kind of structurally some things already built into that meeting that happen each time that I think is very good for everybody. The biggest thing, with that kind of being the national and regional review from College House on the pre-leasing information that they're tracking. But Miles, him and I talked, during our interview back in February, and he said, "Look, Wes, we're really trying to get some more content. If there's something you can help us with there, that would be fantastic." And conversation just kind of grew from there, and we said, why don't we do something with it? Do you want to expand this audience? And leadership committee just basically said, yeah, we want to do that. And so now it's really open to anybody. I strongly suggest anybody that is, property manager and above, or community manager, site manager and above, register for this and be involved on as many as you can be. It's a hour-long webinar, nothing sales pitchy or anything like that. We want to make sure that it's, very straightforward and data driven, and as well as, get some kind of personal insight into things. But we had our first one, and Greta, I'm just interested. I mean, this was kind of it wasn't your first time on this call, but this was the first one that has been branded Shop Talk and kind of under our umbrella here at Student Housing Insight. What were your thoughts?
Well, first and foremost, actually, I'll give you the feedback on that, and then I'm going to say something else. But I absolutely loved it. I loved it. And to the point where anybody that I knew, because obviously my phone was inundated with all the notifications of people signing up, which I will come back to. But, so I knew the people that had signed up, and anyone that I knew that hadn't, I was like, you have to get signed up for this. Was so fantastic. I'm very excited for the next one. And Wes, I talked to you obviously right afterwards, and you're like, are you just saying that? No, I wasn't just saying that. I genuinely loved it. I loved that we could see everybody. I loved the platform that you chose. I felt like it really showcased all of the information. I really loved, because I wasn't sure, honestly, about the whole choosing one market and focusing on a market. I was like, is that going to be limiting? Is that going to be not interesting? But it was really interesting. I loved seeing, all of that, like Jordan and Saad and, all of these people from all of the operating companies that had projects in this specific market, and them giving their feedback on the market. Like, that was really fantastic.
Yeah, it just, because maybe I didn't catch it, but what Craig is referring to is, in addition to reviewing the national and the regional, we are also doing a deep dive into a market. And so for this first one, we actually did one back in March. We did Penn State, and then for this one in April, we did Gainesville, Florida. And if you don't know about Gainesville, there's a ton of stuff coming on board. And so we wanted to have a discussion about who's involved with those new deliveries, and how that's going to impact the market. So that was great. Then we also did a kind of a 15-minute segment of just educating everybody on ESG. If you don't know what ESG is, just go Google it.
I'm not going to tell you. Make your fingers do the work in.
Yeah. Well, look, this podcast is long enough as it is. So, but go look that up. And probably the best way, and it was Echelon Energy that kind of gave the presentation on it, because there's so many, there's so much of those kind of things that I don't think we get to, even the companies within the industry don't get to talk to everybody about it. So we did a 15-minute segment on that. Jen Cassidy also announced a mental health initiative that she's working on with some folks.
Love that.
Yeah. And so if you missed it, go back to shoptalk.info. And we've got the recordings there. The recordings will always be there. And go ahead and register. And that way we'll make sure that you get notification of the next ones. The next one is going to be May 17th at 1 p.m. Eastern. So make sure you put that on your calendar. And again, if you register, we'll send you a link to put it on your calendar. So.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is that for anyone that already registered, or you are looking to get information on it, that's actually on the website as well. So anyone that looked at it and they're like, hey, I didn't get the email. We did find out that it bounced from some people, or that it was spammed, or that it went to, if you have Outlook, we all know that we now have the focused and not focused, or whatever it is, the two categories. And somehow it sits in the unfocused section of the box. So on the website, there's now a menu. And on that menu, it will show you all the past recordings and presentations. Additionally, you will also see where it'll give you the link for the upcoming Shop Talk. Additionally, you can add it to your calendar. There is a little widget so you can automatically add it to yours. So it's already added to mine. So you don't, that's all optional on the website. So again, you can go to the website. You can automatically get the link right there. You don't have to wait for an email or panic that you don't have it. It's right there. You can click the day of, the moment of, or in the middle of the call.
Yeah, yeah. And we'll also send out a notification on SHI Connect. So if you've got that on your mobile device, you can get a direct link there as well. So well, hey, with all of that being said, and I've got another phone call I've got to get to. Let's go ahead. Yeah, let's go ahead and play this interview that I had with Mike Mouron from Capstone. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Wes. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out. You've been one of those people that have been in this industry the entire time I've been in the industry, and we've ran into each other before, but haven't had a chance to really sit down and have a conversation. And when we were prepping for this, you gave me a lot of time to kind of go through everything that you've been through with Capstone, and it was pretty enlightening. You think you see a company doing things, and you think you kind of know that company, but you don't really know them until you sit down with their founder and really talk to them. But I guess going back to that Capstone brand, that's been around the entire time that I've been in this industry. That company, was split into 4 companies back in 2012. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But before we get there, other than you being a college student at the University of Alabama, which I know you're proud of, what was kind of your first intersection with student housing? Was it a development project? Was it on the management side? Mike, I guess what I'm really asking is, how did you get started in student housing?
Wes, I was a one-man development department for a construction company in Montgomery, Alabama, named Algernon Blair, which was named after the man who had started it several generations before. Blair had what they called an open shop division, Castle Construction. And Castle was building a number of what was referred to as kiddie condominiums, and in the Southeast. And when I heard that was fascinating. So I traveled to the job sites and spent a little time in the various university markets. And what I noticed was that there was a lot of excitement on the part of the college students to have a new facility being built specifically targeted to college students. The floor plans were still conventional in their design, and the expectation was that there would be 2 students living in each bedroom. But at least they were new, they were relatively close to the campus, and so there was a lot of buzz. And what I also noticed was that some of the residents were willing to pay double rent in order to have a private bedroom. Mm-hmm. And so that began to plant a seed. And then also, the more I looked into it, the more I realized that the condominium format had its own challenges. Most of the time, since this was a relatively new market, the lending banks would require a very high pre-sale before they would release the loan and allow construction to start. Right. Well, all of us in the industry know the importance of being ready to be occupied once fall classes start. And a lot of times the delay in starting construction of the kiddie condos caused them to be late. Yeah. And so because of that natural encumbrance, my thought was to develop the units as apartments rather than condominiums. Mm-hmm. But, Wes, unfolding it a little bit further, it's interesting. You talk about, you've been in the industry 25 years. Well, when I got interested in student housing was in the early 80s. Mm-hmm. And I think it would fascinate a lot of you much younger people to realize that back then, there was not really a segment of the market called student housing. Right. I mean, there were certainly apartments and houses in that leased or rented to students, but there was really not
housing was just on campus at that point. That's all.
Well, it had a lot of on campus, but it had a lot of, facilities around campus. It had some in the markets that really weren't even that close, but the students have to live somewhere. Most universities only house a relatively small percentage of their student body. So the other students have to live somewhere, but there was not a market segment called student housing. I can remember when I first got interested, traveling to the multifamily housing conventions, oftentimes seemed like held in Las Vegas. And it was interesting that here was a large group of people gathered to talk about multifamily, and there was not even a breakout session on student housing. In other words, it was just not it was not being talked about. Well, I found that fascinating when you realize, of course, the number of universities and the millions of college students, and the fact that they have to live somewhere. And I thought this was an unserved market niche, and I found that fascinating. And so we began to try to design units that would offer private bedrooms. Another thing I noticed in touring the kiddie condos is that if you have two students staying in a larger bedroom, you still have to have the travel path from the door into that bedroom to the furthermost bed. Mm-hmm. And so you have a travel path that cannot be encumbered by furniture or anything else. So the thought process, I worked with David Demarest of Demarest and Associates, who is an architect in Dallas. And David was the architect on a number of the more successful kiddie condominium projects. So I sought him out. And what we did is we basically put the travel path outside the bedroom. And so what we divided the larger bedroom into two smaller bedrooms. The bedroom size probably grew a little bit to accommodate two, and then we accessed each bedroom off the hall. So what we were doing is giving a private bedroom. Yeah. And the rule of thumb then was that a student would pay 150% for a private bedroom. 150% of what they'd pay in a shared bedroom, they'd pay in a private bedroom. Yeah. And so even at the low rents back in the 80s, we were getting about $1 a square foot in rent. And I know now many markets are north of $2 a square foot, but there's also been a long time between the early 80s and 2022. So $1 a square foot was actually high rent at the time. And it allowed us to build specifically designed developments for the students, to amenitize it for the students, to provide enough parking, which was normally short in most conventional apartments if you had multiple students living there. And so we just began to build a student specific facility, and it was very well received.
So going back to that, the first kiddie condo project that you worked on, outside of, before Capstone was developed, what market was that in? What was?
Actually, I didn't personally work on it. Castle Construction, a division of Algernon Blair, was building it as general contractor. Gotcha. And it was being developed by other people. In fact, it's interesting. The man who was the developer of the kiddie condo in Tuscaloosa that I contacted, he and I began to talk, and I told him I was thinking about doing student apartments in Starkville. Mm. And he says, student apartments won't work. It's got to be condominiums. And I said, well, I'm beg to differ. I'm going to try apartments for the reasons I shared with you earlier. To his credit, he was flying over Starkville, I don't know, a year later or something. And he called me and he said, I told you it wouldn't work. And I flew over your parking lot in Starkville and saw that it was slammed full of cars. So obviously I was wrong. And so, from that point, so Starkville was the first development. Interestingly, it was the first student development I did when I was head of development at Polar Beck. I didn't make the transition. Algernon Blair was headquartered in Montgomery, I think I told you.
Yeah.
Both my wife, Kathy, and I are from Birmingham, and I got the opportunity to come back to Birmingham as head of development of Polar Beck. And at Polar Beck, the first student development I did was at Mississippi State University in Starkville.
Gotcha.
And so, and then interestingly, when I formed Capstone 5 years later, the first development we did as Capstone was back in Starkville.
Oh, wow.
So Mississippi State holds a warm spot in my heart when it comes to the student housing.
Gotcha. So 5 years later, after that first deal in Starkville, you start Capstone. Your first project's in Starkville again. Kind of take us through what happened from there till 2012.
Well, again, I was head of Polar Beck, or development at Polar Beck, and the more we did student housing, the more my immediate group and I got excited about it, interested in it. The companies, the big construction companies for which I was serving as head of development, were large commercial construction companies. And I remember one time one of the men said, "We're tired of investing in stick frame construction in dusty little small college towns. We want to be in bigger markets doing commercial type development." Well, that was during the period. I remember when he said that. I remember this fact. It's funny how you remember little comparisons. There was more vacant space in Dallas, Texas than there was space in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I thought to myself, if you have the city of Pittsburgh vacant in the heart of Dallas, that much space, doing commercial development in major cities didn't make a bit of sense to me. Yeah. So 3 of the people working with me at Polar Beck and I left and formed Capstone in actually very late 1990. 85 is when I moved to Birmingham. 1990 is when we started Capstone. Gotcha. And 3 of the my associates and I left at that time to do it. I remember we had a single office in which I had 1 desk, 3 chairs, and there were 4 of us. So there was always somebody sitting on the desk or sitting on the arm of a chair or something. And
that's great.
And one of those individuals was John Vaughter, who came to work with me, I think, when he was 23 years old. And now John is one of the principals at Capstone Communities. I think we'll probably talk about the successor companies to Capstone, and John's one of the owners of one of those successor companies.
Yeah. So take us through kind of those early years. I mean, how long did it take you before you were like, okay, we're a real company. We're going to really do something with student housing? How long did that take?
Not long, because the product we were delivering was being so well received. I remember we opened a project in Auburn, and they sent me pictures, and the students were camping out overnight the night before we opened the leasing office in order to try to get the specific unit that they found most attractive. So we had a tent city of students camping out, just like they were waiting to get tickets to the Final Four or something, And I think I remember I got a picture that we signed over 100 leases the first day in Auburn. So it was being so well received that really it was just a matter of, could we find locations close enough to major campuses? And we started off in the Southeast, almost like Southeastern Conference. And then it seemed like we started working in the Big Ten area, and we got out into the Southwest Conference area, and ultimately, got all the way to the West Coast, developed in Eugene, Oregon. So it was going very well. And I guess about 5 years or so of being very active and off campus, we were approached by a number of universities in varying degrees of various ways of contact. And in so many words, they were saying, you and others look like you're successful at recruiting and housing our students off campus. We, the university, it's proven to be more difficult for us to keep the students on campus. Maybe there's something we could do together. And it was interesting because using the same computer model I was using at the time, which I'm sure is so basic now it would be almost laughable, but using the same computer model, I changed 3 elements. I put 0 land costs because the universities own the land. I put 0 for property taxes because universities don't pay property tax. And I used a tax exempt interest rate versus taxable, and tax exempt is of course less expensive. So in making only those 3 changes and hitting calculate, it said that I should be able to do a development for 100% debt. No equity should be required.
Yeah.
Well, that was important because if you think about it, if you're trying to finance with tax exempt debt, there really is no opportunity for equity because to get tax exempt debt, you have to be a not-for-profit. Most not-for-profits don't have equity per se. And so, armed with the knowledge that if those 3 things could be accomplished, I should be able to get 100% debt, I started to look at, okay, how do we accomplish those 3 things? The easiest was the free land because the university, would ultimately lease the land typically for $1 a year. The avoidance of property tax, the owner of the leasehold improvements had to be a not-for-profit whose charter was, or for doing student housing was eligible within the framework of their charter, the boundaries of their charter. And I couldn't find any not-for-profit that met that requirement. So we started Collegiate Housing Foundation. And we started Collegiate Housing Foundation, and we applied for and received a 501c3 designation from the IRS. So now we had the land, now we had the not-for-profit owner. So the last thing was access to tax-exempt debt. Well, the first on-campus development Capstone did was a small development at Spring Hill College in Mobile, Alabama. Okay. It's a small Catholic Jesuit school. Okay. And we built a 143-bed development, I remember. And
I got to tell you, I really didn't know that there were Catholic Jesuit schools in in Alabama.
There's Spring Hill, and it's been around for a long time. It's a great school. But anyway, so we did that, and I forget even which bank took the tax-exempt paper, tax-exempt bonds, and held it in their own portfolio. Okay. But we started to do that, and then we did a couple others, and it occurred to me that this market, this segment, on-campus student housing financed with tax-exempt debt, was going to grow much faster than we could find banks who were willing to keep that much paper in their own portfolio. We had to tap the public market. Well, the challenge there was that if one does not have a development that is rated by the rating agencies being Moody's and Standard & Poor's and Fitch, if the development is not rated, then it sells at what's called junk bond rates, which is, of course, higher. Well, the objective was to lower the interest rates as much as possible so that we got it closer to what the university's source of capital cost, in order that the university would not be paying a premium in order to have Capstone or whomever else develop on their campus. So that meant we had to get a rating. I originally had targeted a lady named Mary Peliquin Dodd, a hyphenated name. She was head of head of the academic division of Standard & Poor's at the time. Mary was pregnant, as I recall, and was having difficulty, and she was not working much. And so, since I was uncertain as to how long that would be, I turned my attention to John Turner at Moody's. Mm-hmm. And we began to focus on Moody's and getting them to recognize the product as being investment grade.
Yeah.
And they did. Ultimately, the first project that I believe was ever deemed to be investment grade was at the University of Central Oklahoma. Okay. And it was interesting because the University of Central Oklahoma was itself not a rated institution at the time.
Okay.
And yet our housing on their campus was deemed investment grade. So it became a Baa3, Moody's Baa3, which is their lowest investment grade. Well, the fact that we had an investment grade now gave us another opportunity, and that was we could get credit enhancement.
Okay.
And credit enhancement, the primary source of that was what they called monoline insurance companies. And a monoline, M-O-N-O, meaning, one. And they had that name because all monoline insurance companies did at that time was insure municipal bond portfolio. I mean, they would insure municipal bonds. So what we did is we went to, and there were, I think, 7 or 8 of them at the time, AMBAC and FISLIC and a few others. And so what we would do is we would literally discuss our development with one of the bond insurers. If we could get them to issue a premium, we would, just like any insurance, we would pay a one-time fee at closing for the premium. Mm-hmm. But our bonds would then be insured to a AAA level. So the bonds for Capstone development projects on these campuses were selling at a AAA rate, meaning the interest rate was lower. Yeah. So again, all the effort was to lower the interest rate so that we became closer to the universities. Very few universities themselves are AAA rated. Probably, I mean, it's a handful. And so
the ones with really high endowments to begin with.
I think so. I think that's exactly the limit. And so, I mean, even the University of Alabama may be a AA, and it may buy credit enhancement in order to become AAA. It's just a function. I mean, it's a very simple function of how much does the insurance cost, since that would be financed over the 30-year bond issue. How much additional outlay, did that take every year? And was that outlay deemed to be better than the alternative, which is selling unrated at a higher interest rate? It's a pretty simple calculation to make to see whether the credit enhancement was worthwhile or not.
So this sounds like that's what really kind of created the vehicle for you guys to really go crazy with on campus.
That's exactly. And unfortunately we could not patent a business approach. And so we ran as fast as we could, because at the time Capstone was, had introduced it and was therefore the leader. And so there was a period of time that every RFP that came out that we went after, we got.
Yeah.
But as we say, you can only do so much each year, and it was not hard to copy the approach because all of this was public information to begin with.
Yeah.
And so other people began to copy and improve and enhance, what we were doing, and that's just the capitalistic market that we all benefit from. All Americans benefit from.
Well, prior to 2012, when the companies were split up, how many projects were you guys doing in a year, on campus versus off campus?
Well, a lot of times you'll be starting a project and another one will be finishing, and a lot depends on the length of time. Sometimes these are, more than a 12-month project. But I think we would be actively working on maybe 6 to 8 projects, which, Capstone was not a large company, so we were very busy at the time.
Yeah, no, that's That's a handful for sure. I mean, I know there's some guys out there now that are doing a lot more than that in a year. Yeah, they also see the slowdown coming, and they're having to
Well,
make
they're
do it.
doing a lot more, and the ones they're doing are a lot larger. So,
Yeah.
but again, Capstone has always been a private company. We never formed a REIT. We never, at the time, really never took institutional money. So we were always limited by the sources of capital, I guess you'd say.
Yeah. Now I do remember a big sell off that you guys did on the off campus side. I guess going into, let's call it 2002 to 2005, right there when I think the big sell off was to GMH, which was getting
Right.
ready for their IPO. That really, I mean, that took you guys from a really large company from a portfolio, stabilized property standpoint to really, I think
Sold most of it, yeah.
yeah, maybe just 2 or 3 properties, right?
And it's funny because people used to ask me about what's my exit strategy, and I used to say my exit strategy is paying off the mortgage. And but we were financed with a variety of different things, friends and family, and some limited amount of foreign capital and everything else. So it just seemed like the right time to sell. Plus, our product was usually, oftentimes, 4-bedroom, 2-bath. Was the main workhorse, and people were already developing bed to bath parity. So we thought maybe it was a good time to sell, and I think in retrospect it probably was.
Yeah, there were a lot of folks that were involved with those transactions with GMH at that time, and we sold the company I was with at the time sold 2 properties to them leading up to that, and I think they were I can't remember. I guess they were probably the second behind ACC to become public in the student housing sector, and
I think you may be right. Then followed by EDR.
yeah,
There's a speaking of EDR, there's a part of the student housing market niche that I really would like to learn more about, and that's what Allen and O'Hara did
yeah,
decades before I started Capstone in doing the large off-campus dormitories.
yeah,
And Allen and O'Hara, of course, is the predecessor company to EDR.
yeah.
Allen O'Hara was a construction company. And it may be interesting for you to, on your student housing insight one time, to try to go back and understand.
Yeah, we had a recent conversation with Miles Orth back in February, where, and of course, he's the chief operating officer at Campus Apartments, but he actually got started on one of those Allen O'Hara properties when he was in Madison, Wisconsin, and yeah, we had a little bit of a conversation about how that, because that's Bill Bayless at ACC worked on one of those properties.
Yeah, he and Tom Trubiana both did, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. And so, it's amazing to see. And it was just it was a different structure, it was a different management structure. The property managers over those properties were master real estate folks.
Right. Well, you know what? I don't know what caused it I don't know what caused them to stop building that product. I don't, I don't know if, I think, and this is going by memory, which is dangerous at my age, but I think it was Northwest Mutual was maybe the source of the money.
I believe so.
And I'm just wondering whether the insurance company lost interest or if it started to have operational difficulties or what. But I think that'd be an interesting story to learn a little bit
Yeah,
more.
hopefully we can get some of those folks on at some point in time and kind of go through that, because I followed a lot of it. And the thing is all of those properties are still in play. They lease out really well year after year after year. I mean, it was amazing what they did with that. Well, hey, so let's go up into 2012. You guys are kind of reaching a point where something needs to change, and everybody's kind of got a different focus with on campus and development and building out portfolios. And a lot of times I get phone calls of saying, "Hey, who do you know here or there? And what's this about Capstone in Birmingham?" And there's there's, Capstone Real Estate Investments, and there's Capstone on campus. Is it all the same company? So I think it'd probably be beneficial for the audience just to, kind of understand why that split up happened and what
Sure.
kind of what everybody's focused on now at those different companies.
Sure, glad to. Let me digress just a minute. The name Capstone, I think most people know it as being the stone on top of a column. And since most colleges have columns on their campus, we thought that was appropriate. Capstone, for those of us who live in Alabama, is also a term that is synonymous with the University of Alabama. Mm-hmm. If it has a headline that says news from the Capstone, it means news from the University of Alabama. So being an Alabama grad, that was kind of fun to, both have a nod to my alma mater and then have a name that's synonymous or perceptually appropriate for most university campuses. But there's even something more subtle. The less known definition of the word capstone is a person's lifetime crowning achievement. It's that individual's capstone is their lifetime crowning achievement. So I think it's a very appropriate play that certainly Capstone Development Corp was my business lifetime crowning achievement. My wife and family is my life's crowning achievement, but from business, it's Capstone. So I just think it's interesting that a name that is thrown around a lot of people don't know the relation to the university, and almost nobody knows the more subtle definition of the term. But I thought that just a little trivia. Trivia. In 2010, I was 60 years old, and I started thinking about the succession of Capstone. I own all the stock in Capstone Development Corp. I had a number of people who had what's called a profits interest, up to 50 total between them. Total 50% of the profits of the company went to the key individuals working with me at the time. So, but I owned all the stock, and I thought it was time for us to start thinking about succession. My 3 sons were working in the company at that time, but that was also 12 years ago. My oldest son, Drew, is now 42. Christopher's 40 and Lewis is 37. So 12 years ago, they were a good bit younger and not prepared experience-wise or even desire to try to take over the company. And I can assure you with 3 sons in the business, I don't know how in the world I would have selected one to run the company and what that would have meant at Thanksgiving table, but from the other 2. But so I kind of toyed with selling the company, and actually the 2 most prominent suitors, and that may be exaggerating a little bit, but were 2 very large international construction companies. They will go nameless, but one was from England and one was from Australia. Okay. And both sent representatives here, and we entered into dialogue and everything. And I just could not get comfortable with what that would mean for the people who remained at the company, how that would change their lives. I would take X amount of dollars and go my merry way, but I worried about the other people because, they had worked with me so very long and so loyally. And I know Kathy and I were visiting a couple friend of ours down in Seagrove or Seacrest or somewhere in Florida. And he had sold the company they owned in Atlanta, and they had moved down there, and they had a beautiful home, and out on the dock was a huge boat. I mean, a boat big enough that he had to go to a course to learn how to captain it. It was that big. Yeah. And he said, you would think I should be living a great life here. And he said, I am. But he said, every time I call back to the office in Atlanta and talk to the people, they are so miserable that it just ruins that day and about 2 days after it for me, that I think I'm down here living the life of Riley, and they're up in Atlanta miserable. And I remember I walked out of their house. We said goodbye and walked out. Before I even got in the car, I told Kathy, I said, that does it. I'm not selling Capstone and going through that. So then I began to try to figure out, okay, if you're not selling it, what are you going to do with it? I couldn't put any one individual in charge of Capstone, kind of for the same reasons I talked about with my sons.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of these people had worked with me 20 years or so, and to try to select one to become president and over the others, I thought would have not been very well received by some. So then I began to look at the fact that Capstone seemed to break into 4 separate and distinct divisions. We really didn't call them divisions at the time because it was one company, you know, and we didn't have to make that type of designation. And so I began to look, and it just came to me that I should break Capstone into 4 separate companies and, in effect, put in business the people who were running those divisions.
Yeah.
And so we started talking about that in 2011, maybe late 2010. And I had set as the target, okay, I will retire January 1st, 2013. And I thought it would take us that long to do everything that needed to be done to divide the one company into 4. And I think one thing I laughingly said, I always thought the people at Capstone worked real hard, but as soon as they knew that they were going to own their own company, they found a 5th gear I didn't know they had.
that's
and they and so we were actually able to do everything we needed to by January 1st, 2012. So we actually accelerated my retirement a year because everything was done and they were biting at the bit to, go off on their own. It's interesting, and I've been told this by a number of people, having a profits interest in a company is good, but it still is not having ownership. So I divided the company, Capstone Development Partners. The principals are Jeff Jones and Bruce McKee, and that successor company focuses on on-campus development or development undertaken in direct affiliation with the universities.
Gotcha.
Capstone Collegiate Communities, which has now been shortened to Capstone Communities. The principals are Rob Howland, John Vaughter, and Ben Walker. And they started off doing new development of student housing off campus with no direct affiliation with the university. Capstone On-Campus Management, which now I think just goes by COCM, is the only company whose name tells you what they do. They manage on college campuses, college and university campuses, either for the university itself or the university's foundation. They own no property. They're fee managers only, and I believe they're the largest on campus of properties owned by the university or the university's foundation. Some other private companies manage their own properties on campus and are bigger than COCM. And then lastly is Capstone Real Estate Investments, which is owned by Kathy's and my 3 sons. And they were acquiring existing student properties and repositioning it. And this repositioning can be rather minor and just be mostly a managerial maybe improvement, but sometimes it's significant. They may literally add bathrooms. They may divide 4-bedroom units into 2 different apartments. Oftentimes they make significant changes. They took one of the off-campus dormitories in DeKalb, Illinois, and they had 2 towers. I think it was 8 stories each tower, with a large common area in between. And I think they did something like added 258 kitchens, and they combined units into apartments and took it from an off-campus dormitory to an off-campus apartment by making just massive changes. So that's what Capstone Real Estate Investments does.
Gotcha. It's an incredible story, and I think it goes to show, your thoughtfulness into both kind of being able to leave a legacy, but also to reward the folks that got you there.
Well, if you think about it, except for COCM, the other three companies are primarily developers. Mm-hmm. Now, each of them have their own management, in-house management capacity.
Right.
But at the core, they're developers. Well, as a developer, you're usually only as good as the next deal, and so it's really, to me, would be difficult to try to get an effective development company to pay the owner much money, since in effect they are the assets.
Yeah.
It's like somebody said, your assets get on the elevator every night to go home, And so that's why people say, well, how much did you sell them their companies for? I said, I didn't. I gave it to them. But all I really gave them was, if you think about it, was the ability to use the Capstone name, which we had all collectively worked very hard to make a name that was well received within the industry. And so they had worked as hard as I had to do that. So giving them what, I felt like I was simply giving them what they had worked long and hard to earn. And I'm proud to say that, that was now 10 years ago, and all four of the companies are thriving and growing and doing very well. So I tell people, I don't necessarily take a lot of credit, but I will take credit for hiring good people. And I think that's been proven by the success of the four successor companies.
Absolutely. How involved with those companies are you today?
Minimally involved. I think I'm supposed to have a conversation later today with Rob Howland and John Vaughter about an asset we still own together, but minimally involved. And so, and people asked me one time, they said, well, aren't you offended that you're not being called upon more to, be involved? And I said, no, you don't understand. I said, the less they call me, the better, because that makes me realize I am no longer responsible for their well-being. And, I felt like I was responsible for far too many people for far too long. So I said, the people showing their independence and doing well is just really emotionally very rewarding to me.
Yeah, it's a huge compliment. So, I want to talk a little bit about, your thoughts on the industry and that type of thing. But before we get to that, you talked about the capstone and kind of the crowning achievement. And previously, you and I had a conversation about, a project that you guys did in Birmingham for veterans. And, in a lot of ways, that kind of seems like a crowning achievement there, because some things you were able to pull off were just incredible. You mind telling the audience a little bit about that?
No, I'd be glad to, because I'd both suggest and challenge successful developers to undertake something in their home community along these lines. Find something that you're passionate about, and most charities have some real property needs. And so if a qualified, successful developer can find something that they're passionate about, chances are there could be a project that's well suited for them. And there's nothing I'm personally more passionate about than the U.S. Armed Forces. The men and women who in uniform who put themselves in harm's way and allow you and I to sit here and drink coffee and have this pleasant conversation. I don't think we can thank them enough or do enough for them. And I feel especially that way about those that are injured in that role. And there is a wonderful organization in Birmingham called Lakeshore Foundation. And Lakeshore Foundation is really like think of it as almost a YMCA for people with physical challenges. Mm-hmm. And in addition to providing that facility for those of us who live in Birmingham, Lakeshore has an outreach where they reach out to injured military across the country, and they bring the injured military into Birmingham at no cost. And they have weekend camps where they're basically trying to expose the injured military to physical activities that maybe the injured military person did not feel comfortable trying, or had never done before, or thought maybe they used to do it but they couldn't do it any longer. And Lakeshore does a great job of pushing those people into activities and causing them to realize that while they have certainly lost something, they haven't lost everything, and they can do a lot more than maybe they thought they could. The injured military used to live in the dormitory on the Lakeshore Foundation campus during these camps, but the family members they brought with them had to stay in hotels. Well, that was missing the point of trying to keep the family unit intact while the injured military went through this weekend camp, because part of it was not only training the injured military as to what he or she could still do, but it was getting that injured military's family to realize that their loved one had maybe more capability than they thought to do things, and to not coddle them too much, because that just perpetuated the apparent inability to do things. I remember one wife said, he'll never be able to tell me he can't take the trash out anymore, and so anyway, the Capstone, we were just moved to do something for Lakeshore, and so we committed to build what's called the cottages at Lakeshore on the campus, and we built 10 units for the injured military, the families, the injured military and their family, to live at while they're at these camps. And it was just especially rewarding. There were 100 companies in Birmingham and elsewhere involved in that development. Some obviously to much greater degree than others, and then we also sold naming rights. I laughingly said it looked like a NASCAR. We had naming rights stuck on everything that was stationary, and we were able to complete the development and at no cost to Lakeshore, and actually gave them a check for almost $400,000, I think, going by memory. To apply towards what they call the Lima Foxtrot program, which is the camp for the injured military. But quickly, I thought it was interesting that the suppliers who sent material sent their very best material. They didn't send a 10-year warranty roof or a 15. They sent the 30-year architectural detailed roof. The windows were the top of the line window. The grills were Gen Air grills, not some other lesser quality. So everything the people did in giving it was the top of the line, and I thought that just showed how much Americans care about the military and what they've done for us to put forth their best foot. In fact, the people on the job, the contractors, said, my workers seem to be doing an especially high quality job on this one. They said, we're just struck by how every nail is driven straight, and if it's not, they pull it out and do it again. And so it was inspiring. And then we had the grand opening on Veterans Day 2010, I think. And I tell people we've done a number of projects. Capstone Communities did a similar project at Glenwood, which is another fine entity outside of Birmingham, and it's for people suffering with autism. And Rob and John and Ben took it upon themselves to build some residential units at Glenwood under the same arrangement. So I think it is very fulfilling to the person in charge, but I think it also is fulfilling to everybody in your company. And I think it also serves to give your company a reputation in the community that is something you strive to achieve. So it's a win-win-win.
Yeah, I remember when some things came out in the press about it, and it just the coordination that it took, and getting people to buy into it. It's not a hard thing. I mean, no one's going to say no. I don't want to help the veterans, right?
Well, a few people tried. I think maybe I told you when we first visited that I can't stand asking people for money or to do me a favor or whatever, except in the situation when it involved the injured military. And the few people who tried to turn me down or do less than I thought they were capable of, I felt like, and I did at times say, maybe I didn't make myself clear. This is for people who got injured protecting you and me. Yeah. So, don't tell me you're not going to do what I'm asking, and so I went from being hesitant to asking people for money to probably being blunt and rude about my expectations.
Yeah. Well, it's been a while. I've seen it on the website. I've never seen it in person, but it's a beautiful little community. And
it's 12 years old now, and it's actually prettier than the day we opened it because the landscaping is matured, and Lakeshore Foundation is doing a wonderful job maintaining it. Lakeshore is an Olympic and Paralympic facility, and it's the home of the U.S. rugby team, the wheelchair rugby team.
Okay.
And you talk about a rough group of guys, is the guys who play rugby in a wheelchair.
I'm thinking, I'm just trying to envision what that looks like.
Just picture collisions in wheelchair, okay? And I asked the people who run Lakeshore, I said, well, does the rugby team stay in the cottages when they're on campus? And they said, heck no. They said, those guys are so rough, we won't let them stay in the cottages. We make them stay in the dormitory. So anyway, but it's, as I said, it's all good. And I would encourage anybody hearing it that has the capacity to do something like that to undertake it. You'll be glad you did once it's done.
It's a great team building, both your internal team and kind of your external team of pulling things together to do that.
Yeah, and like I said, it's always good. The subcontractors, I think appreciated being included. We published a book. My sister actually did the book, and what we did is we had all the people who participated write letters about why they did it, notes or emails or whatever about why they did it. And my sister took those and put them all in a book along with pictures and everything. And so we were giving them out to the family members who come and stay there. And it just is a book of people just thanking them for their service and sacrifice.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Mike, let's kind of move forward to the future and talk about kind of your thoughts on student housing. Because I mean, you've seen so much, you've created so much. I mean, as you were sitting here talking about the cottages at Lakeshore, I was thinking, yeah, you guys had experience with that because you guys were kind of one of the first to introduce that cottage product to purpose-built student housing, and so I'm just sitting here thinking over the past couple of decades and the things that you guys have been involved with, it's got to give you the ability to kind of forecast what you're seeing now. We've got population drop off, college age students with going certainly into 2025. The pandemic impacted a lot of things on how we thought about or how we think about education, specifically higher education. What's your thoughts on the future of student housing?
Well, interesting. You talk about the cottages. That really, what do they say? Most good ideas are stolen. There was a man developing kind of a cottage development decades before we started doing it, and it was called the Mill District, again, back in Starkville.
Yeah, I remember.
And it had a lot of little different homes and garages converted and everything, and it just became a charming little neighborhood. So that since we were obviously in Starkville a good bit, we began to try to think of how do we take the ability to create something like this and do it, more broadly. I think the first one we did was done in Auburn, maybe, and it was Creekside Development, and that was done as condominium because it was big and it was relatively expensive to do in the manner we did it. But Creekside today, if you drive through the gates, it's kind of like I said about the cottages at Lakeshore. It's actually prettier than when we delivered it because the landscape is mature. Yeah. I mean, this looks like a quaint neighborhood. And so, we had done that some time back, and Capstone Communities is continuing now to build cottages of that nature for rent, and doing very well with it.
Yeah. On the, are you talking about more from the build to rent?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. It's amazing how student housing folks, especially those that have been involved on the cottage side, that they're now getting involved in that, and the lenders and investors, these guys are made, these guys were made for this.
They're well suited, and they're doing a great job. In fact, my sons and I have invested in several of them, and proud to do it.
Well, what's your outlook on student housing moving forward?
Well, I'm probably more cautious than a lot of people would be, but I've probably been more cautious all my life than maybe would have been. Maybe I'd have been well served to be a little bit more aggressive. But as you said, it's the number of college students are finite. Now it can grow a little bit, I realize, and the international students can come back in a greater way maybe in the future. But still, there's a certain inelasticity to that market.
Yeah.
I think you run the risk now with everything becoming so electronic, or more. Is there going to be a lot of students who choose to basically stay at home and get their education remotely versus go to college? That's a risk. It doesn't sound like any fun to me, but that's a risk. I think the high cost of new construction and the high cost of land and everything else, taxes, property taxes going up, makes it so the new product can only appeal to a certain element of the student population. Yeah, at least those that don't go into terrible debt to try to get their education. And so I think there needs to be a degree of caution. But then, I think, Wes, the main difference, I think, between when I started Capstone and now is the source of the capital. If you think about it, back when I started, if you didn't have the money yourself, it was mostly friends and family equity, as we used to call it, and bank loans, and then maybe you rolled it into an insurance permanent loan type. But, I never heard the term sovereign capital back in the 80s, and institutional money and all these funds and everything that is just such a vast amount of capital chasing yield and chasing deals in so many different markets. And I think if the people doing the development and everything, if it's not their money, and if they're not guaranteeing it, my wife and I, for Capstone, we had to personally guarantee everything Capstone did.
Yeah.
And there's not that same risk, I guess. Yeah. And so therefore the risk reward is, to me, arguably out of balance, because there's very little risk, and the reward comes to some fee developers and that only if they develop.
Yeah.
And so I think there could be some what was the term people used to use for the stock market at times? There could be some irrational exuberance. So I think there needs to be some thought given to that. But again, it's the source of the money is really what dictates whether, it's not developers claiming to have a great idea. It's the source of money being willing to back the people that creates the product. I mean, fun, fuels the product coming. So until that slows up, I suspect it will continue fast and furious.
So one thing I love about what your sons are doing, with the renovations, because there's so much stuff that was built in the 90s and even early 2000s now that could really, they're great assets, and they've probably transitioned hands 3 or 4 times at this point. But they really never had the renovation that they needed. So.
It's interesting. My sons have actually purchased some of the developments that Capstone did originally, and you ought to hear them criticize me on deferred maintenance, or Dad, we didn't know you built such a cheap product. We've had to go back in, and I said, wait a minute now. We haven't owned that product for a long time. Don't talk to me about what you're finding. So
crazy how things come back around.
So anyway.
Well, hey, listen, I thank you for the time. And before, just want to ask a question on behalf of our audience, because, most of our audience are site level managers, regional managers, folks on that operation side. And, most of them have been involved since they were, in college, and now they've kind of been in this full time for, 5 years or so. And they're really kind of asking themselves, is this something I want to make a career out of? And just want to kind of get your perspective. What kind of advice, not necessarily you should make a career out of this, but, what kind of advice would you give for that audience member that is thinking about moving into something else within student housing, or within real estate development? What's your advice for them?
Well, I guess, again, going back to my age, I get asked by a lot of people similar questions about, what might I pursue post college or whatever. And I always tell people the same thing: find something you're passionate about. And if you can identify something you're passionate about, and chances are you'll be good at it. If every day of doing something you're passionate about really is not a day of work. It's a day of pursuing your passion. I meant, again, we talked about my dividing Capstone into 4 companies in 2012. Well, here it is 10 years later. I'm now 72 years old, and I still work 6 or 7 days a week pursuing a variety of developments, for my own account, non-student oriented, but for my own account, simply because I just love real estate development. Yeah. So I think if people are in student housing and they're not passionate about that aspect of it, maybe they need to look at a different aspect of student housing. And I always challenge people. I've always tell my sons, if you're learning something frequently as part of your job, chances are you have a good job. So if you can find something you're passionate about, and if you feel like you're learning something frequently, pursuing that work, then chances are you're in a good place and you'll do well. I mean, like I said, even at my age and my experience, I still feel like I learn things. I'm doing developmental developments now of a type that I've never done before. I did a hotel. I've done a number of restaurant and food and beverage venues. I'm doing a industrial park outside of Birmingham, all of which certainly has elements of real estate development, but has nuances that I had not done before. So I find that interesting, and I feel very lucky to have chosen a profession that I can continue to work at. My wife of 45 years is glad I have a profession I can work at too, or otherwise I'd be at home and under her foot. So it works out well for both of us.
Well, fantastic. And yeah, that's great advice. It is something that I think I'm amazed at how passionate I still am about student housing, because it's something that, I've seen a lot of folks get burned out really quick, both on the operations and the development side. But it's just something every day. I think a lot of it is, part of, your impact in the future in some way. And,
I thought it was funny that somebody says, those of us who have been in this industry, they say, here we are, we're aging, and our customer never ages. Every year there's another inflow of freshmen. So, they look younger and younger, and I look older and older. So there's something, something wrong with that formula.
Matthew McConaughey movie where, he said, we get older and they all stay the same age. So,
yeah.
Well, Mike, again, thanks so much for giving us your time and just imparting some of this history and knowledge on our audience. I think we're all better for it, and looking forward to Student Housing Business and Interface giving you the Lifetime Achievement Award in Austin next month, and excited to see you there and get to shake your hand. And again, just thanks for everything that you've done here for this podcast, but also just for what you've done for the industry.
Well, thank you, Wes. I appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you in Austin also.
All right. Take care.
Well, again, a big thanks to Mike for spending so much time with us and giving us that history lesson on what he's been involved with and the impact that his company has made. I should say his companies at this point have made in the industry. And obviously, he'll be attending Interface. So if you're going to be attending and you see him there, make sure you say hello to him and that you heard about him on the podcast. Greta, any final thoughts?
No, not at all. Love it. Hope everybody loved it as much.
All right, guys. Thanks again. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next time.
Bye.